Hello everyone, please tell me. Which city are you listening from? What time is it there? I had been walking for what felt like hours, my feet sore from the endless pavement beneath me. The evening air was cool, the kind of crisp air that makes you pull your jacket tighter around your shoulders. I didn't have any particular destination in mind, just a restless urge to get away from the house, to clear my head. I had been inside all day, caught up in the noise of my own thoughts, and it had gotten to the point where I needed the quiet of the outside world to drown them out. The street I walked down was a familiar one I had passed 1,000 times before, lined with old houses and trees that had long since shed their leaves, leaving the sidewalks littered with browns and golds. The street lamps flickered on, casting their soft yellow light across the road. I walked with my head down, lost in my own mind, thinking about nothing in particular. That's when I saw her. She was standing just ahead of me, a few paces away, just by the corner of an old building. Her back was turned to me, and I noticed the way her hair fluttered in the wind, soft strands catching the light of the street lamps. She was wearing a long coat, the fabric swirling around her legs as if she had just stepped out of an old photograph. There was something about her that struck me immediately, something familiar, though I couldn't place it. I paused for a moment, wondering if I should say something, if I should walk past her or speak up. But before I could decide, she turned around. Her face, when she faced me, was gentle, calm, almost serene. There was something familiar about her features, something I felt I should recognize. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe ask if she was lost, but before I could, she gave me a soft smile. And then just like that she turned away again, facing forward, her coat swishing around her as she took a step toward the street. I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, she was gone. Not just moved, not just walked away, but gone. The space where she had been standing was completely empty. I scanned the street, the shadows growing longer now that the night had fully settled in, but there was no sign of her anywhere. The quiet of the street seemed louder, almost oppressive, as if the entire world had suddenly held its breath. I stopped, my pulse quickening, as I imagined her. It seemed impossible. I had seen her, I was sure of it. The moment was vivid, her smile clear in my mind, the way her coat had fluttered in the wind. And yet, in the blink of an eye, she was gone, as though she had never been there at all. I stood still for a moment, trying to make sense of what had happened. But there was no explanation, no rational reason for it. I took a few more steps forward, looking around the corner where she had been, then down the street, but there was nothing. Just the quiet emptiness of the street and the dim glow of the streetlights. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that something about the encounter wasn't right. My heart was still racing, the tension in my chest like a weight that I couldn't shake. I turned back the way I had come, hoping the walk would clear my head, but the image of her, the way she had turned, the smile, the calmness in her demeanor, kept replaying in my mind. And then it hit me. I hadn't heard her footsteps. Not a sound, not a shuffle, not even the faintest whisper of movement. When I had first seen her, she had been standing still. But even when she had turned away, there hadn't been the usual sounds you expect when someone moves. The wind had picked up a little, but it hadn't covered the silence. No sound of footsteps, no sound of fabric rustling, It was as if she hadn't walked at all. My steps quickened, my mind racing. I reached the corner of the block and paused, looking back down the street, searching for any sign of her. Nothing. The world seemed quieter now, the streets colder, emptier. And then I heard something, a faint rustle behind me. I spun around. There, standing at the very spot where she had just been, was the figure of a woman. The same woman, the same coat, the same soft hair blowing gently in the wind. But this time, she wasn't facing me. She was looking down at the street, standing still, like a statue. I couldn't see her face, but the strange, familiar feeling rushed back to me, like I should know her, like I had seen her before. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my head as I took a step toward her. Before I could speak, before I could even call out, she turned her head. She didn't smile this time. Her face was neutral, almost blank, and when she met my eyes, I felt a coldness, something unsettling that made my breath hitch in my throat. But before I could react, she turned her body away again, slowly, as if she were moving through water, and walked calmly down the street, her footsteps perfectly silent. I stood frozen, my body unable to move, unable to comprehend what was happening. I stared after her, watching her disappear into the shadows. I didn't blink this time, but when I stepped forward, when I reached the corner again, the street was empty again. There was nothing there, no sign of her at all. The sidewalk was completely vacant, the streetlights casting long shadows that seemed to stretch forever, yet the emptiness was unmistakable. No figure, no footsteps, just silence. I kept walking, faster now, trying to leave the unsettling moment behind, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The streets I had known for years felt unfamiliar, colder, as though the world had shifted slightly, and I was left standing in the middle of something that didn't make sense. As I walked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, expecting to see her there, but each time, she was gone. There was no woman, no footsteps, nothing but the night pressing in around me. And yet, even now, as I sit in my apartment, I still feel it. That lingering presence. The memory of her turning around, only for her to vanish in the blink of an eye. I can still picture her face, clear as day, and yet, I know she was never really there at all. I had seen her, yes, but somehow, she had never been part of this reality. And now, I wonder if I ever truly left that street at all. It was late afternoon when I first stumbled across it, just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long, soft shadows across the familiar park. I had been walking for what felt like hours, my feet tired from the usual route I always took, a meandering path through the park's winding trails. I'd walked this path 1,000 times before, the scent of damp earth and the sound of birds calling above grounding me in the everyday rhythms of life. But that day, something felt different. I turned a corner, stepping off the beaten trail and into an area of the park I didn't recognize. It wasn't that it had changed, was that it hadn't been there before. There was no sign of the usual trail markers, no familiar landmarks to guide me. The trees seemed denser here, their thick trunks casting deep shadows, and the underbrush grew taller, thick with wild ferns and tangled roots. The path was narrow and seemed to open into a space that should have been familiar, but wasn't. I paused, squinting at the space ahead of me. The air was heavier here, and a strange quiet had settled in. It felt like I was stepping into a forgotten corner of the world. There was no sound, no movement. The usual hum of the city in the distance was completely gone. My pulse quickened, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. But there was something oddly compelling about the path, something that made me keep moving forward, even though I couldn't explain why. As I continued, I looked down at my feet, noticing the soft dirt of the trail beneath me. It wasn't the usual gravel or paved stones. This was raw earth, soft from the recent rain. I looked ahead again, and that's when I saw it. Footprints. At first, I thought they were mine, the imprint of my shoes in the dirt from the steps I had just taken. But when I looked closer, I realized something was wrong. The footprints were fresh, yes, but they were not in the pattern I walked. They were different. Slightly off from my usual stride, a little deeper, as if someone had walked ahead of me. I stopped, my heart beginning to race. I knew there was no one ahead of me at least. I hadn't seen anyone on this path. The park had been nearly empty when I started my walk, and now I was sure I was alone. And yet, the footprints were there, clearly visible in the dirt, leading deeper into the woods. A shiver ran down my spine, but I couldn't help myself. I followed them. Each step I took, I saw more and more of those footprints, distinct impressions of shoes that weren't mine. They seemed to lead somewhere, to a place further into the woods, and despite the unease growing in my chest, I felt strangely compelled to follow. As I walked, I found myself growing more and more disoriented. The path became less distinct, less familiar. The trees grew closer together, their branches twisting high above, creating a canopy so dense that the daylight seemed to fade from the air. I could feel my breath quicken as the silence deepened. The only sound was the crunch of my feet against the dirt, echoing in the heavy stillness of the woods. The footprints ahead of me, fresh and clear, seemed to lead me on, pulling me into the unknown. And then, after what felt like an eternity of walking, I came to a clearing. The trees opened up into a small patch of grass, surrounded by dense woods. In the center of the clearing was a large stone, smooth and flat, as though it had been placed there intentionally. The footprints stopped at the edge of the stone, leading right up to it, and then, nothing. There were no more marks in the earth. The ground here was untouched, the air still. I stood there, my breath caught in my throat, staring at the stone. For a moment, I thought I saw something shimmering on its surface, a faint, almost imperceptible outline, like the faintest trace of a handprint. I reached forward instinctively, drawn to it. My fingers brushed against the surface, and for a split second, I felt something, a fleeting sensation, like an electric shock running through my fingertips. I jerked my hand back, startled. The world around me seemed to shift, as if the air itself had changed. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my head, but the more I looked at the stone, the more disoriented I became. It was like the clearing was spinning, the trees blurring around the edges of my vision. My breath quickened again, and I turned, ready to leave, to get back to the path I knew. But when I turned to leave, I saw something even stranger. The footprints were still there, my footprints, but they had shifted. The dirt, which had been soft and undisturbed when I first arrived, now seemed to reflect a different pattern. My footprints, my own, were deeper than before. They had changed direction, as if I had walked backward, retracing my steps. But I hadn't. I had only just turned to leave. I looked back at the stone, the sense of vertigo growing stronger. The world around me was wrong. It felt like something had shifted, like time itself had become unstable. I walked forward a few steps, but then I stopped again, staring at the footprints I had left. They weren't in the right order. The path I had followed had begun to circle back on itself, creating a loop that didn't make sense. The ground beneath me felt soft again, too soft. The deeper I walked into the clearing, the more the dirt shifted underfoot, as if the earth itself was undoing my steps. I looked back at the stone once more, and in its surface, I could swear I saw a reflection not of myself, but of the footprints I had left. And they were moving. They were walking away from me, back into the woods, as if someone else was walking in my place, retracing the path I had taken. I didn't know what to think, what to believe. I was lost, both in the woods and in myself. But when I turned to leave once again, the path was no longer the same. The dirt had shifted completely, and the path I had walked down was now completely erased. There were no footprints, no traces of where I had come from. The only thing I could see was the stone, standing silently in the middle of the clearing, watching me. It was then that I realized the truth. I wasn't just walking the path, I had become part of it. The footprints weren't just mine. They were a record of something else, something ancient. Something that wasn't just a trail through the woods, but a pattern I had never meant to follow. I turned to walk back, but the way had changed again. There were no more footprints. There was no path. There was just the stone, the endless stretch of trees, and the overwhelming sense that I had become lost in something that wasn't meant for me. The earth beneath my feet was soft, shifting, and the only thing left was the imprint of my own confusion. The footprints I had left were gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there, waiting for me, leading me back to the place that didn't exist. The train ride had been uneventful, just as every other commute had been. I was heading home after a long day, tired but not exhausted, lost in the rhythm of the tracks as the city outside blurred into the evening haze. The train car was filled with the usual mix of passengers, tired workers, students with their headphones in, and a few people absorbed in their phones. The kind of mundane, predictable scene that felt almost comforting after a long day. I had made this journey countless times, the route carved into the routine of my life, the familiar sound of the train's wheels on the tracks, the occasional stop, the way the lights flickered in the tunnels, it was all as familiar as the back of my hand. And so, when the train slowed in preparation for the next stop, I didn't think anything of it. I glanced at the station name on the digital display above the doors, Barton Street. Barton Street was my stop. I had taken it hundreds of times. The same station, the same platform, the same crowd of people. But when the doors opened, something felt off. The air outside was colder than usual, the street lamps casting long, sharp shadows on the pavement. And yet, it wasn't just the coldness that made me pause. It was the stillness of the platform. I stepped off the train and glanced around, expecting to see the usual evening bustle of commuters, the low hum of distant traffic. But there was nothing. The station was eerily quiet, almost abandoned, with only a few people milling about. Their faces were blurred, their movements stiff, like they were caught in a time loop or frozen in place. I felt a strange tightness in my chest, but I told myself it was just the fatigue of the day playing tricks on my mind. I stepped further into the station, my footsteps echoing unnervingly loud against the cold tiled floor. The walls were faded, older than I remembered. A few stray newspapers were scattered across the benches, their pages yellowing with age. The station was dimly lit, the overhead lights flickering intermittently, as though the place was on the verge of decay. And then, I saw it. A clock on the wall. It was an old-fashioned thing, its hands frozen, not at the time of day, but in a position that made no sense. The hour hand was stuck at 7, but the minute hand was pointing to a time much earlier, 3 o'clock. The clock wasn't just broken, it was telling the wrong time altogether. I shook my head, a wave of disorientation washing over me. Maybe it was just the lighting, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. Maybe the station had been undergoing repairs, or perhaps the clock was just old. But there was something else, something subtle that I couldn't quite grasp. The platform felt different, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. It felt like I had stepped into a place that didn't belong to me, like it had been torn out of some other time and was waiting for me to figure out how I fit into it. I glanced up at the train schedule, expecting to see the usual list of upcoming stops, but the board was blank. It was as if the train's arrival had been the last event to occur here, and now everything had come to a halt, suspended in a timeless vacuum. I turned to look at the few commuters standing on the platform. They weren't moving, they weren't even talking to each other. They just stood there, silent, their faces unreadable, their eyes vacant as though they were waiting for something. It was then that I noticed the signs. The ones on the walls were different. The station name had changed. Instead of Barton Street, it read Barton Junction, a name I didn't recognize. My breath caught in my throat. Barton Junction. That wasn't right. I had lived in this city all my life, and I knew there was no such station. There was Barton Street, yes, but this was something else entirely. I turned, my mind racing, and saw the train I had just gotten off of. But it wasn't the train I had boarded. The carriages were older, the colors faded, the windows cracked in places. And most unsettling of all, there were no passengers inside, just empty seats. I could feel my pulse quicken, the air around me growing thicker, heavier, as though the station was closing in. I needed to leave. The weight of the silence around me was unbearable. I turned and walked quickly toward the exit, my footsteps louder now, my breath shallow. The exit was ahead, but as I neared it, something caught my eye. There, at the far end of the platform, was a woman standing alone, looking down at the tracks. She was dressed in a long coat, her dark hair flowing behind her like a shadow, her face hidden from view. She was the only person on the platform who seemed to be moving with any purpose. Her figure a stark contrast to the stillness of everyone else. As I approached, I noticed something strange. Her reflection in the glass of the station building didn't match her movements. Her reflection was stationary, as if she were frozen in place, while her real self was walking. I stopped in my tracks, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. There was something wrong with the way she was positioned, as though she wasn't meant to be there at all, as though she was a shadow caught in the wrong time. I took a deep breath, trying to push the fear down. I had to leave. One had to get out of there. But as I turned toward the exit once again, I heard her voice, soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakably clear. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I turned to look at her, but she was no longer standing by the tracks. She was right in front of me now, her face still hidden, her figure unnervingly close. She stepped forward and then, almost in an instant, she was gone, as if the space between us had been swallowed by time itself. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What had just happened? The station, the train, the woman, all of it felt like it was slipping through my fingers, like it wasn't real, and yet it was real. I could still feel the chill of the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I stepped through the exit doors, desperate to get away from the confusion that had overtaken me. But when I looked outside, I saw that the city had changed. The streets were unfamiliar, the skyline different, the buildings older, their facades cracked and worn. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, the familiar city around me now unrecognizable, as though the world had shifted into a different version of itself. I turned back to the station, but when I looked, it wasn't there. There was nothing but empty space, a vacant lot where the station had stood just moments ago. My stomach churned as I realized the truth. I had stepped off the train, but it wasn't the same station anymore. I had stepped into another time, and I had no idea how to get back. I first noticed the shop on my usual route, the one I walked every evening when I needed to clear my head. The streets were quieter at dusk, the city noise fading into the background as I found comfort in the steady rhythm of my footsteps. It had been a long day, the kind that pulls at your bones, so I didn't think much about the small, unassuming shop when I passed it the first time. It was tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner, wedged in that odd little space on the block that always seemed to go unnoticed. It had a simple sign, nothing particularly eye-catching, just an old wooden board with fading letters that read, ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** the kind of place you'd pass by without a second thought. The window was cluttered with items I couldn't quite make out, their details obscured by the dim light from the street. I didn't give it much attention as I walked by, lost in thought. But as I continued on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been odd about it. Maybe it was the air around the shop that felt thicker, heavier than the rest of the street. I couldn't place it, but something about it lingered with me. By the time I reached the end of the block, I turned around, intending to head back home, when I saw it again. I had passed it before, but when I looked at the shop this time, the sign had changed. The wooden board still hung above the door, but the faded letters were now different. The sign read, ***** oddities and antiquities. ****, I blinked, confused. I could have sworn it had said something else just moments ago. My mind raced, trying to recall the exact words, but I couldn't. Maybe I had just imagined it, a trick of the light or my tired eyes. I stood there for a moment, staring at the sign. The shop seemed the same as before, small, nondescript, nothing special, but the change in the sign made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't a drastic change, just a shift, a little off from what I had seen before. I took a deep breath, shook it off, and kept walking. But as I neared the intersection, I couldn't help but glance back once more. It was almost automatic, like the shop was pulling me in, making me look again. This time, when I saw the sign, it was completely different again. The words now read, asterisk, asterisk, curiosities and oddities. Asterisk, asterisk, I stopped dead in my tracks. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a shiver ran down my spine. What was happening? I had walked past that shop only moments ago, and the sign had changed 3 times. The letters weren't just rearranging. They were shifting in a way that didn't make sense. I hadn't imagined it. The shop was different every time I looked at it. I took a hesitant step toward the door, my curiosity pushing me forward despite the unease gnawing at me. The window still looked cluttered with items, but this time I could make out a few of them more clearly. There were old clocks, some tarnished silver spoons, a collection of yellowing books, and behind the glass, in the dim light, there was something else. A tall figure, barely visible in the shadows, standing at the far end of the shop. It was too far to see clearly, but there was something strange about the way it stood too still, almost as if it were waiting for me. I felt a pull, an urge to go inside, though my mind screamed at me to leave. I should have turned away, kept walking, gone home. But instead, my feet moved on their own, stepping toward the door as if I had no control over them. As I reached for the handle, I froze. The reflection in the window wasn't mine. There, in the glass, was the face of someone I didn't recognize, staring back at me with wide, empty eyes. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. I turned away quickly, almost running, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I glanced over my shoulder, the shop was still there, still waiting, but the sign was now just a faint blur in the corner of my vision, as though the words were shifting again, blending together. I didn't stop walking until I was a few blocks away, my mind spinning, my pulse racing. What had just happened? The shop had changed its sign 3 times, and I had been pulled toward it as if it was drawing me in. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, fatigue, stress, maybe even the strange half-light of dusk that can make everything feel a little off. But something inside me knew that wasn't true. The next evening, I found myself walking the same route again, my steps slower this time, more cautious. I didn't want to go near that shop, but I couldn't shake the nagging pull to see it again, to know if the strange experience would repeat itself. As I approached the block, I felt a knot in my stomach. I turned the corner, and there it was, the shop. But when I looked up at the sign, it was back to the original, asterisk, asterisk, antiques and curiosities. Asterisk, asterisk, the same sign I had seen the first time, the same unremarkable lettering. I stood there for a moment, feeling both relieved and disturbed. The shop looked normal, ordinary even, as though nothing had ever happened. But the feeling inside me was different. I had seen it change. I had seen the reflections, the shifting signs. I couldn't explain it. And somehow, I knew that I would never truly understand it. I walked past it, my eyes never leaving the door, as though it might call to me again, drawing me in. But it stayed still, quiet, and unremarkable. I never went inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face in the reflection, staring back at me from the shop window. And I knew deep down that I wasn't the only one who had seen it. I wasn't the only one who had noticed the sign changing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The shop was still there, waiting for me, waiting for someone to step inside. The sign would change again, and this time, I might not be able to turn away. It was late afternoon when I met her, walking through the quiet streets of the city as the sun began its slow descent into the horizon, casting long shadows across the pavement. I didn't expect to see her, didn't expect to find someone waiting for me on that stretch of sidewalk where I always walked alone. But there she was, standing by a street lamp, her posture casual yet somehow expectant. I could feel it in the air, the way it felt when you encounter someone you didn't plan to, but still, somehow, feel drawn to. She smiled at me, and I smiled back. The kind of smile you share with someone you've known for a while, even though we had never met. Her face was soft, unremarkable in that way that made her seem both ordinary and somehow ageless. I couldn't place her, but when she spoke, her voice felt familiar, like a half-remembered song from childhood. "Hey, I've been meaning to talk to you," she said, her tone light, like she was asking if I wanted to walk with her. I blinked, unsure of how she even knew who I was. "Talk to me," I asked, my voice sounding uncertain, but she didn't seem to notice the hesitation. "Yeah," she said, her smile widening, "I've been thinking a lot about the park lately. You know, the one just off Maple Street. The playground there." I nodded, my curiosity piqued. I knew the park. It wasn't a place I spent much time in. Its playground was old and neglected, surrounded by overgrown bushes and faded benches. But it had a kind of charm, something nostalgic about it. I had passed it many times on my walks, but never stopped. She seemed to read my thoughts, her eyes glinting with some hidden understanding. "I think you should come with me," she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "It's been a while since anyone really went there. The playground needs someone to visit." I hesitated, feeling the weight of her words, but something about the way she said it made me want to follow. Something about the invitation felt like it had been waiting for me, like this was some kind of moment that was meant to happen. Without really thinking, I nodded, agreeing to go with her. We walked together in silence, the streets growing quieter as the evening deepened, the last traces of sunlight slipping away into the horizon. The further we went, the more the city seemed to fade behind us, replaced by the quiet murmur of the wind through the trees. The park wasn't far, and in no time, we were standing at the edge of it. It looked different in the soft twilight. The playground, which had once been a place of laughter and energy, was now still. The swings hung motionless, swaying only slightly in the breeze. And the merry-go-round was covered in rust, the colors long faded. The fences surrounding the playground were in disrepair, leaning at odd angles, as though no one had cared to maintain them in years. The air felt thick, almost heavy with silence, as though the playground itself was waiting for something. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would disturb the quiet. "It's always been here, but it's been forgotten, hasn't it?" I looked around, taking in the sight of the once vibrant space, now abandoned, forgotten by time. The jungle gym stood in the center, its paint peeling, the slides cracked with age. I could feel the weight of the emptiness pressing down on me, the absence of joy, of movement. It was as though the park was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever would. I turned to look at her, but she wasn't watching me anymore. Her eyes were fixed on the empty playground, her expression distant, as if lost in thought. She looked so at home there, standing in the fading light, as though she had always belonged to this place. I stepped forward, drawn by some unseen force, and made my way to the swings. I touched the cold metal frame, the rust flaking beneath my fingers. I hesitated before sitting down, the seat creaking as I lowered myself onto it. The swing barely moved as I gently pushed off the ground, a soft squeak filling the stillness. For a moment, I just swayed there, the gentle motion the only thing that felt normal in this strange place. But then, a strange feeling crept over me. The air grew colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something that wasn't quite right. I looked around the playground, the empty, rusted structures standing like ghostly remnants of a past that no one remembered. And then, for just a brief moment, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, just beyond the trees at the edge of the park. I blinked, but when I looked again, it was gone. I stood up, my heart beating faster now, a sense of unease settling into my chest. I glanced at the girl who had led me here, but she was no longer in sight. She had disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone in the quiet, desolate playground. The feeling of being watched intensified, like the very air around me had grown heavy with unseen eyes. I tried to shake off the growing panic, but it was hard to ignore the feeling that something was wrong with the place. The park, once so familiar, now felt alien, its silence oppressive. The rustling of leaves in the trees sounded like whispers, like voices that I couldn't quite understand. I felt as though the ground beneath my feet was shifting, as if the park itself was moving, rearranging its boundaries, closing in on me. I turned quickly, ready to leave, but when I reached the gate, I found it locked. The chains that had once been loosely draped over the gate were now tightly fastened, as if someone had decided to close it off entirely. I tugged at the metal bars, trying to force my way through, but the lock didn't budge. Panic surged within me. The playground was no longer just abandoned. It had become something else, something that wasn't meant to be visited, something that had been waiting for me. I turned back to the swings, where the movement had stopped. The stillness was suffocating now, and I could hear the faint creak of the rusted chains as if they were calling me back. I didn't know why, but I walked back toward the swings, my legs moving against my will, drawn in by something I couldn't name. And there, in the faint glow of the streetlights, I saw her again, the girl. She was sitting on one of the swings, her back to me, gently swaying back and forth, her feet barely touching the ground. I wanted to call out to her, but no words came. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, watching her swing in silence, the empty playground echoing around us. The air grew colder still, the shadows lengthening. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the girl turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting mine. But it wasn't her face I saw. It was a mask. A pale, featureless face that seemed to stretch and shift in the dim light, its expression unreadable, its eyes hollow. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. As the swing continued to creak in the silence, the only sound in a place that should have been forgotten. And just as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. The playground was empty once more. The swings hung motionless, the shadows deepening around me. The air was still, the only sound the distant rustling of the trees. I was alone, but I could still feel her presence, the weight of her gaze, lingering in the cold, forgotten park. I left that night, but I never forgot the park. I could never forget the way it felt, how the playground, once so full of life, had become something else. Something that wasn't meant to be found. Something that would always be waiting for me. It was just after sunset when I first noticed the store. I had been walking aimlessly through the city, lost in my thoughts, when something caught my eye. It was a small tucked-away shop on a quiet street I had never noticed before, its windows dark but inviting. The shop didn't have a name, no neon signs flashing, no displays of goods spilling out onto the sidewalk. Just a dark, shadowed window with an empty, almost unsettling quality to it. I stopped for a moment, curious, though there was a strange feeling in my chest, like a quiet tug pulling me toward it. I hadn't meant to stop, but something about that window made it hard to look away. I stood in front of the glass, trying to peer inside. The interior was dim, the kind of dimness that makes you squint to see anything clearly. There were shelves against the walls, filled with objects I couldn't quite make out. They were the kind of objects that might be described as antiques, things that felt like they didn't belong in the modern world. But still, I couldn't quite see them. The reflection in the glass was clearer, sharper, more distinct than what lay inside. I glanced at my reflection. I was tired, my jacket a little too thin for the cool evening air, the collar turned up against the chill. My hair was a bit messy, and my hands were shoved deep into my pockets. But I looked ordinary enough, I thought. Maybe even a little worn from the day's stress. But then, as my gaze shifted, something about the reflection shifted too. It was subtle at first, something off about the way my face was angled, the way my eyes looked in the glass. The reflection wasn't quite in sync with my movements, and for a split second, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I stopped moving, staring at myself. But it wasn't me. Not really. The reflection of my face in the window didn't look tired. It looked younger, fresher. There was a light in my eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, a spark of something I couldn't place. My expression was calm, almost serene, unlike the subtle exhaustion I felt. My hair wasn't messy anymore. It was neat, tucked in place, as if I had just walked out of a different kind of life, a life that wasn't mine. The more I stared, the more I realized the reflection didn't match me at all. The person in the window seemed to smile, just slightly, but there was a kind of knowing in that smile, a familiarity that felt wrong. I took a step back, my heart racing, my thoughts racing with it. Was I imagining things? Had I been standing there too long, lost in some fleeting moment of self-reflection? But as I pulled away from the window, the reflection didn't pull back. It stayed in place, staring back at me as if it were frozen in time. I stepped closer again, hesitating just at the edge of the glass, my breath fogging up the surface as I leaned forward. The person in the window looked familiar, but wrong. I had seen that face before, but not my own. It was someone I knew, someone from another time, from another life. The longer I stared, the more the reflection seemed to distort, as if trying to break free from the confines of the glass, like it was reaching out to me. I could feel it, could almost hear it, as if the reflection was beckoning me to come closer, to step through the window and into whatever strange world it inhabited. I stepped back, stumbling slightly, my breath quickening, but the reflection didn't move. It didn't react to my retreat. It stayed still, watching me with those unfamiliar eyes. I glanced around, but there was no one else on the street, no one to help me make sense of what was happening. Just the eerie, quiet evening air and the soft hum of distant city sounds. I was about to turn and leave when I noticed something even stranger. The reflection of my hand, pressed against the glass, wasn't mine. The fingers in the reflection were longer, slimmer, graceful. And there was a ring on one of the fingers, a simple band that I didn't own. I didn't wear any rings, not ever. But in the reflection, there it was, gleaming faintly in the dark. I yanked my hand away, my pulse pounding in my throat. The image in the window was no longer just wrong, it was something else entirely. Something I couldn't explain, couldn't shake. I turned to leave, my heart racing, but before I could step away from the window, the reflection of my face twisted, ever so slightly, into something darker. The smile deepened, and my eyes, in the glass, they weren't mine anymore. They were cold, empty, like they had seen too much. Like they knew something I didn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away, even though I wanted to. Even though everything inside me screamed to run. It was as though the reflection in the window had become something else, something with its own mind, its own intentions. And the longer I stood there, the more I realized that I wasn't just seeing my reflection. I was seeing something that had once been me, but wasn't anymore. Something I had left behind. I turned, quickly now, my feet carrying me away from the window, away from that person in the glass. My heart was pounding, my mind reeling, but when I glanced back, the window was empty. There was no reflection. The window was just a dark, quiet pane of glass, and the shop was as silent as it had been when I first saw it. I walked away, my thoughts still spinning, the unease deepening in my chest. I tried to push it away, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, some fleeting moment of confusion. But as I walked down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that the reflection in that window had been waiting for me, had been calling to me, as if it knew me, as if it knew my past and my future, and had been waiting for me to see it. And then, just as I turned the corner, I could have sworn I saw something moving in the corner of my Aja figure, just for a moment, standing in the window of that empty shop. The same smile, the same eyes, watching me. I never went back to that street again, never stepped near that window. But sometimes, in the quiet, when the world around me feels too still, I swear, I can still see the reflection of myself that isn't mine, just behind my own eyes. It was late, the kind of late where the world feels distant, as if everything outside the window has been tucked away into silence. The clock on the wall above my desk was ticking steadily, its rhythm the only sound that accompanied me through the night. I had long since finished my work, but something intangible kept me in my chair. A quiet unease lingered, like the feeling that I was being watched, even though I was alone in the office. It was the kind of night that clung to you, pulling you deeper into its stillness with each passing minute. I stared at the clock as I sipped my coffee, the warm liquid a small comfort against the chill that seemed to fill the room. The clock was old, a brass wall clock I had inherited from my grandmother. It was a simple thing, no chimes or ornate carvings, just a well-worn face with Roman numerals and delicate hands that had been ticking for as long as I could remember. But tonight, there was something different about it. It wasn't loud or intrusive, just a quiet, steady ticking. And yet, the longer I watched it, the more it seemed wrong. The hands were moving backwards. At first, I thought I was imagining it, or maybe my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I blinked, the hands hadn't moved forward. They had slipped back, slowly, deliberately, each second lost in reverse. The minute hand was inching toward the previous hour, while the hour hand shifted back, as if time itself were being undone. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The ticking had become almost inaudible now. The sound softened, as though the clock was trying to hide its secret from me. But it was there, undeniably so, each tick a backward step, each passing moment taking me further from the present. And yet, no one seemed to notice. The world around me remained still, as if no one else could see the subtle shift in time, as if the clock's strange movement was invisible to anyone but me. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long, and walked toward the clock. My fingers hovered over it, as if I could stop the hands from moving, as if I could force them back into their proper place. But when I touched the brass surface, it was warm to the touch, almost comforting in a way that felt out of place given the surreal nature of what was happening. I pulled my hand away and stared at the clock, willing it to stop, to return to its normal ticking. But the hands continued to move backwards. Slowly, methodically, each tick taking the minutes further from where they had been. Each backward step undoing everything that had happened. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Time was slipping away, backward, and I was powerless to stop it. I turned toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating stillness of the office. But as I reached for the handle, I felt a cold chill sweep through the room. The air grew heavier, as if the very atmosphere had thickened with the weight of the backward ticking. I glanced back at the clock, my heart pounding in my chest. The hands were almost at the top of the hour now, the minute hand nearly at 12. It was impossible. It wasn't just the clock. It was the entire room. Everything felt as if it was moving backward. The papers on my desk, once neatly arranged, were now disarranging themselves. The coffee cup I had left on the table was slowly sliding back toward the shelf from which I had taken it earlier, as if the events of the evening were being unwound, one by one. I looked at the window. The streetlights outside were flickering, their light dimming as if they, too, were going backward. The hum of the world outside, the sound of cars, the distant chatter of people was fading, retreating into silence, as if all of it were being erased. Minute by minute, hour by hour. I turned back to the clock. Its hands were nearly at the beginning of the hour now, and the ticking had slowed. It was no longer the frantic pace of reversed time. It had become deliberate, as if it were savoring each backward step, as if it knew something I didn't. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the clock, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. The world around me seemed to dissolve into the past, slowly erasing itself, while I remained locked in this strange moment where time no longer followed its usual path. My eyes were fixed on the clock, watching its hands creep backward, and yet no one else seemed to notice. The office door, once ajar, now seemed further away, the hallway outside growing dimmer with each passing second. It was then that I realized something. The clock, the room, the air, they were all part of something bigger, something I couldn't understand. I wasn't simply witnessing time move backward. I was a part of it. The clock wasn't just ticking. It was unraveling the very fabric of reality. The world, the office, the life I knew, they were all being undone, and I was trapped in it. I stepped away from the clock, the backward ticking now a constant presence in my mind, echoing in my ears like a drumbeat. I reached for my phone, but when I unlocked it, the time on the screen was wrong. It had shifted to moving backward, slipping away from the present. The minutes were being erased from the display, just as they were being erased from my life. There was no escape, no way to stop it. I stumbled backward, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The clock was still ticking, still pulling the world backward into itself. I wanted to scream, to run, but no matter where I turned, the ticking followed me, growing louder, suffocating. The building around me, the air, the very moment itself all, were caught in the grip of this backward march through time. I reached the window, my reflection in the glass, distorted and warped, as if I, too, were being undone, pulled backward into something that had never existed. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The ticking faded into silence, and the world stood still. I looked around the office, and everything was exactly as it had been when I first entered. The clock on the wall ticked forward once again, its hands moving in their usual, steady rhythm. The papers on my desk were still where I had left them. The light outside was the same dim glow from the streetlights, and the air felt normal again, untouched by the strange backward unraveling I had witnessed. But I knew, deep down, that nothing was the same. I could still hear the echoes of that backward ticking in my mind, a reminder that time had once slipped through my fingers, taking the world with it. The clock ticked on, oblivious to the silence I carried with me. And though I tried to forget, I couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, the clock was still ticking backwards in ways I couldn't see, pulling at the edges of the world, erasing everything I thought I knew. I looked at the clock one last time, and the quiet ticking felt louder now, more deliberate. But I had learned something that night. Time was never just a simple forward march. Time was fragile. Time could be undone. And perhaps, in some way, it always had been. I had been working late, the soft glow of my desk lamp the only light cutting through the thick darkness of my apartment. It was one of those nights where the city outside felt distant, almost forgotten. I had long since stopped paying attention to the ticking clock, my mind drifting between the task at hand and the overwhelming sense of unease that had started to settle over me. It wasn't anything particular. It was just a quiet feeling that something was wrong. I don't believe in superstition, not really. I can't remember the last time I gave much thought to the creaks of an old building or the strange noises that sometimes rise from the pipes late at night. But that evening, something felt different. The air around me seemed to still, and the silence too thick, almost oppressive. Every now and then, I would hear something, a faint scraping sound, a whisper just at the edge of my hearing, too soft to trace. At first, I thought it was the building settling, its old frame complaining under the weight of the world, but the longer I listened, the more it seemed like something else. When I received the message from her, I didn't think much of it at first. I'm downstairs. Let me know when you're ready. The building's safe, you'll see. She had texted that, her words casual, reassuring, and yet, for some reason, they unsettled me. Safe. I had never felt unsafe in this building. It was the sort of place that, despite its age, had always given me a sense of security. The faded wallpaper, the flickering hallway lights, the elevator that always stopped just a little too hard, these were the quirks that made it feel like home. I had never once thought of leaving. I always thought, if anything, the building was a constant, a place that would quietly endure long after I had gone. But that night, as I stepped out of my apartment and into the hallway, the building seemed different. The air was heavier, somehow. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, but there was something wrong about the way they buzzed something off, like they were struggling to stay on, to keep their grip on the ceiling. The hallway stretched longer than usual, the shadows deepening in a way that made me hesitate. I had lived here for years, but tonight the space felt unfamiliar. When I reached the door to the stairwell, I saw her standing there, her silhouette framed by the dim glow from the exit sign above. Her presence, normally a comforting thing, now felt odd, almost like a reminder of something I had forgotten. She was smiling, as she always did, but there was something different about it tonight. Her eyes didn't meet mine immediately. Instead, they drifted to the floor, to the edges of the stairwell, like she was searching for something, or perhaps something was searching for her. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. She glanced up, her smile widening just a fraction. "Yeah, everything's fine. The building's safe, I promise. You'll feel better once you see it." I nodded, though a part of me didn't feel reassured. "You said the building's safe," I repeated, trying to piece together the feeling that was crawling under my skin. The words felt strange, as if they weren't meant for me to hear. She laughed softly, as though she hadn't noticed the discomfort in my voice. "I know, it sounds silly. I just meant, don't worry. It's just an old building, right? It's settled. It's different tonight, that's all." I didn't know what she meant, but I wasn't in the mood to question her. I followed her down the hall toward the stairwell door, the creaking sound of the floorboards beneath our feet louder than I remembered. We passed an apartment on the left, its door slightly ajar, and the faint flicker of a television spilling a pale light into the hallway. The whole scene felt like a dream, blurred and disjointed. The building felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. As we descended the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that the air around us had thickened. It was as though we were moving through something heavier, now something ancient. The old wood of the stairs groaned with each step, each creak echoing in the narrow space like a voice from deep within the building itself. When we reached the ground floor, she led me down the hallway toward the back exit. The hall was dimly lit, shadows stretching unnaturally long. There was something about the way the light flickered above us that seemed wrong, like it was struggling to stay on, but it held dimly, giving just enough light to navigate through the gloom. I followed her without a word, though my heart beats just a little faster now, each step feeling heavier, as if the building itself were pulling me deeper into its grasp. The lobby was dark, but the dim glow of the emergency lights provided just enough visibility for me to see the old furniture stacked in the corner, covered in dust and cobwebs. The lobby, usually a place that felt like an extension of the world outside, now seemed closed off, like a room forgotten by time. We reached the back door, which led to the alley, and I expected to step into the fresh, cool air. But when the door opened, it felt wrong, too quiet, as though the world beyond was just as empty as the building behind us. I stepped out first, the cool breeze of the night air cutting through the stale, musty scent of the hallway. But as I stepped into the alley, I paused. The street beyond looked the same, but different. The streetlights flickered with an odd rhythm. The cars parked along the curb cast distorted shadows, and the sky above was a deeper shade of black, like the night had swallowed more of the stars than it should have. "What is it?" I asked, my voice thick with confusion. She was behind me, just a few feet away, her hands still at her sides, her expression unreadable. "I told you," she said, almost too quietly. "The building is safe. It's watching, that's all." I turned to her, puzzled. "What do you mean, watching?" But when I looked at her face, her smile was gone. Her eyes were no longer soft, but sharp, distant, as if she were seeing something I couldn't. She gestured to the building behind us, the tall old structure looming in the dark like a silent sentinel. "It's always been here," she said, her voice a little shaky. "But tonight, something is different. Something in the walls. The building has always watched us. It watches everyone." My breath caught in my throat. The feeling of unease that had been nagging at the edges of my consciousness surged forward, overwhelming me. I turned slowly, glancing at the building once more. It stood silent, its windows dark, but for some reason, it felt as though the shadows behind the glass were moving, as though something was shifting inside, watching me. I looked back at her, but she was already walking away, fading into the shadows of the alley, her voice calling out softly, "You'll feel it too, soon. The building always claims those who stay." I couldn't bring myself to follow her. The air was thick now, and the weight of the building behind me pressed down with an intensity I couldn't shake. The familiar streets of my neighborhood no longer felt safe. They felt foreign, alien, as if they had changed when I wasn't looking. I stood there, staring at the hotel-like structure, trying to will myself to move. But the feeling that something unseen was waiting for me, just behind the walls, became overwhelming. I could hear it now, the faintest sound, a soft tapping, as if something was moving just beyond my reach, something that had always been there, watching, waiting. And in that moment, I understood what she had meant. The building wasn't just safe. It was watching me, too. It had always been watching, and it always would. It was a cold evening when I first found the hotel, tucked away at the end of a narrow, dimly lit street that I had never noticed before. The kind of street that seems to exist on the edges of your memory, the one you might pass every day without ever truly seeing it. That night, the wind had a sharp bite to it, and the rain that had been threatening all afternoon finally started to fall in quiet, steady sheets. I had been walking for hours, my feet aching from the endless wandering, and I was desperate to find shelter. That's when I spotted it, the hotel. It was a large, imposing building, with tall windows that stretched from the ground to the roof in jagged lines, casting eerie reflections of the wet street outside. The door was slightly ajar, as though inviting me in, promising warmth and shelter from the storm. It looked old, forgotten, and yet there was something about it that drew me closer, as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside, my boots making soft clicks on the polished marble floor. The air smelled faintly of mildew, a mix of damp and something older, like the scent of long-forgotten rooms. It was dark inside, the dim light from the street lamps outside barely making it through the large front windows. The lobby stretched out before me in silence, an unsettling quiet that seemed too complete, too still. I expected to hear the usual bustle of a hotel lobby, the murmur of conversations, the soft clink of keys being handed over, the shuffle of shoes on the floor. But there was nothing. The lobby was empty. No receptionist behind the counter. No guests sitting in the worn armchairs scattered around the room. Just rows of dusty tables, faded rugs, and an old chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, its crystals dull with time. It was like stepping into a forgotten world, a place that hadn't seen life in years. I hesitated, my footsteps faltering as I looked around. The lobby was large, almost cavernous, with dark wood paneling on the walls and an old gold-framed mirror hanging crookedly on one side. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, as if the hotel had been abandoned for decades. The air felt stale, thick with neglect, and yet there was a strange sense of stillness to it, like the hotel was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. I walked further in, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The lobby seemed to stretch on forever, its end obscured by the faint fog of dust and shadows. I noticed a staircase leading up to the second floor, its banister worn and creaky. But still, there was no sign of life. No one, no movement. I reached the front desk, hoping to find someone, anyone, to explain the eerie silence. But the desk was unmanned, a small brass bell sitting in the middle, its surface tarnished. I couldn't shake the feeling that this place was wrong, that something was amiss. I ran my fingers along the dusty counter, leaving behind a trail in the grime. The silence felt heavy now, pressing in from all sides. The faint ticking of an old clock on the wall was the only sound, and even that seemed too loud in the quiet, its rhythmic ticking echoing through the vast, empty room. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, a janitor, a housekeeper, or even just another lost soul seeking shelter from the storm. But there was no one, only the stillness. The hotel seemed like a ghost of itself, preserved in time but somehow devoid of life. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter around me. I needed to leave, to find another place, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, I turned toward the hallway that led further into the hotel. The hallway was dimly lit, the walls lined with framed paintings that had long since faded, their colors blending into the darkness. I felt a pull toward it, an irresistible urge to step deeper into the heart of this strange, forgotten place. Against my better judgment, I took a step forward, then another, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet underfoot. The hallway stretched on, longer than it should have. The silence was suffocating now, so thick it was almost tangible. I reached the first door on the left and pushed it open. But the room inside was just as empty as the lobby. No bed, no furniture. Just walls covered in peeling wallpaper and a lone chair by the window, its fabric worn thin. I closed the door behind me, the soft click of the latch echoing through the empty space. I moved further down the hall. Each door I passed the same, empty, silent, lifeless. I began to feel a sense of unease creeping up my spine, the weight of the silence pressing in from all sides. And yet, despite the discomfort, I couldn't bring myself to leave. It was as if the hotel had ensnared me, its forgotten halls holding me in a strange kind of grip. At the end of the hallway, there was a door, slightly ajar. It looked different from the others, more ornate, as if it belonged to a room that was once special, once important. Without thinking, I approached it, my hand reaching out toward the tarnished brass doorknob. The moment I touched it, I felt a shiver run through me, a coldness that wasn't entirely physical. I hesitated for just a moment before turning the knob and stepping inside. The room was larger than the others, and it was furnished bare. A single bed covered in faded linens, a dusty desk in the corner with a chair that seemed out of place. But it wasn't the room itself that sent a chill down my spine. It was the mirror across from the bed, a large, ornate piece that reflected the dim light in a strange, almost unnatural way. The glass was cracked, spider-webbed with tiny fractures, but still, it reflected everything in the room, everything except me. I stepped closer, my heart racing. I could see the bed, the desk, the worn carpet beneath my feet, but there was no reflection of me. No shadow, no movement, nothing. Just the room, empty and still. I reached out to touch the mirror, and as my fingers brushed against the glass, I felt a coldness seep into my skin, a chill that spread up my arm like ice water. It was as if the mirror was pulling me in, drawing me deeper into its emptiness. I pulled my hand back, my breath catching in my throat. The mirror wasn't just reflecting the room, it was emptying it, erasing me from it. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, the room suddenly feeling smaller, tighter, as if the walls were closing in on me. I turned and fled, my feet pounding on the floor as I ran back down the hallway, back through the empty lobby, desperate to escape the hotel's grasp. But when I reached the door, the one that had been ajar when I first entered, I found it locked. I tried the handle again and again, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rose in my chest as I realized I couldn't leave. The hotel was trapping me. I ran to the back of the lobby, searching for another exit. But everything was the same. The dust, the empty furniture, the silence. It felt as though the hotel had never been alive, as though it had been empty for years, for decades. And now it was slowly swallowing me whole. I could feel its weight pressing down on me, its walls closing in with every passing second. The rain continued to fall outside, the sound of it muffled by the hotel's thick walls, as if the world outside had become distant, unreachable. I was alone now, trapped in this forgotten place, with only the dust and silence to keep me company. And as I stood there in the empty lobby, I realized with a terrible clarity that the hotel hadn't been abandoned. It was waiting for me. And as the clock on the wall ticked slowly, I could feel the hotel's eyes on me, its dusty corners watching, waiting for me to realize that I wasn't just a guest here. I was part of the hotel now, a permanent fixture in its empty, forgotten halls. And the only thing left was the waiting, the eternal silence of a place that had never truly left me. It was one of those days when the air is thick with an unspoken weight, the kind of day where the sky is a dull shade of gray, and the wind whispers as if it knows secrets you're not meant to hear. I had been walking for hours, no destination in mind, just the need to clear my head. The familiar sounds of the city, the hum of traffic, and the occasional chatter of strangers faded behind me as I wandered further from the busy streets and deeper into the quiet outskirts. I had come across a road I hadn't noticed before, tucked between rows of overgrown trees, their branches hanging low as if to conceal the path. It was odd, in a way, because I'd walked this area 100 times. I knew the neighborhoods, the houses, the shops, but this road was new, or at least it felt like it was. It wasn't marked, no signs, just a stretch of cracked asphalt that led off into the woods. A curiosity tugged at me, and against my better judgment, I stepped onto it. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a forgotten lane, leading through tall grass and broken fences. The trees leaned in, casting strange shadows on the ground, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath my feet and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. It felt isolated, almost surreal, but not threatening. I walked on, thinking it would be a brief detour, a brief escape from the world I knew. But as I kept walking, something started to change. The road, which had initially seemed worn and abandoned, grew wider, more defined. And then I reached a place where the road split in two. One path veered sharply to the left, and the other wound to the right, both stretching far into the distance, but neither seemed to offer anything promising. The left path was lined with tall, twisting trees whose branches intertwined above like a canopy, dark and dense. The right path, on the other hand, was clearer but still held in eerie stillness, as if the ground beneath it had been untouched for years. I stood there for a moment, unsure. There was no sign, no direction, nothing to indicate which way I should go. Both paths seemed equally void of meaning, yet each held a strange pull, like they were offering something I couldn't quite name. Something I needed to find, or perhaps something I was meant to lose. Against my instinct, I chose the left path, the one shaded in shadows, drawn by the heavy silence that hung over it. My steps slowed as I moved further down the road, the air growing thicker with each step, the weight of the trees above pressing down on me. The forest felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. There was no wind, no movement in the branches, but it still felt like the trees were watching, listening. The path, once clear, soon became uneven, the ground rising and falling beneath my feet, as if the earth itself was shifting in response to my presence. And then, after what felt like an eternity of walking, I came to a clearing, a small patch of open space in the woods. But there was nothing here. No grand revelation, no view of the horizon, no sign that I had reached any sort of destination. Just the same endless stretch of trees in all directions, as if the world had closed in on me. I stood there, bewildered, and turned around to retrace my steps, but when I did, the path had disappeared. Where the road had once been, there was only more forest, thick and dense, swallowing up what remained of the trail. I tried walking in circles, retracing my every step, but no matter which direction I went, I found myself back in the same clearing. The world around me had closed in, trapping me in a loop of endless repetition. Panic started to creep in, but I told myself I was just lost. That's all. I would find my way back eventually. I would walk far enough, and the road would appear again. But the more I walked, the more I realized that the road wasn't going to reappear. The longer I stayed in the clearing, the more it seemed as if the entire world had forgotten I existed. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming silence that wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. I turned back, deciding to take the other path, the one on the right. Maybe, I thought, it would be different. Maybe it would lead me out of this trap, out of the woods. But as soon as I stepped onto the second path, I felt a strange, unsettling shift in the air. The road stretched out before me, but as I walked, it too began to change. The ground beneath me, once smooth and firm, grew soft and uneven, like I was walking on sand instead of solid earth. I stumbled, caught off guard, but forced myself to keep moving, driven by a sense of urgency I couldn't explain. The trees on this path were less dense, their branches swaying in an invisible wind, but the silence still clung to everything. And as I walked, I realized something. The path, like the one before, was leading me nowhere. I looked around and saw nothing but an endless, empty stretch of road, twisting and turning, but offering nothing. It was as if the very concept of progress had become meaningless. No matter how far I went, I would never reach the end. I started to feel like I was moving in circles, like I was trapped in some kind of strange maze where the roads didn't lead anywhere. The trees became darker, the air thicker, the sky above growing impossibly heavy. The world around me was closing in once again, just like before, and with it came a terrible realization. No matter which path I took, no matter how far I walked, it wouldn't matter. Both roads led to the same place, to nowhere. To a hollow, infinite loop where I was stuck, forever walking but never arriving. A place where time and space seemed to blur together into something intangible. I stopped, exhausted, and stood there in the middle of the road, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The roads, the choices, the endless walking it, all felt so futile. I tried to shake the feeling, to tell myself that I could turn back, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was no turning back. There was no escape. The road had split into two, but in the end, both paths had led to the same place. And this place was nowhere. I was lost, and the world had forgotten me. All I could do now was keep walking, keep moving, and hope that somehow, somewhere, I would find the end. But deep down, I knew that there would be no end. Only the same road, forever, leading nowhere. It was just another evening when I stepped out of the apartment, tired but not quite exhausted, letting the door click behind me as I made my way down the narrow, cluttered hallway. The apartment complex was a quiet one, nestled in the heart of the city, with worn-out paint and flickering lights, a place that always felt both lived in and abandoned at the same time. As usual, the hallways smelled faintly of old carpet and last night's rain, the kind of smell you get used to so quickly that you never notice it anymore. I had no particular destination in mind, just the usual evening walk to clear my head before the quiet night settled in. I liked to think of it as a reset, a way to shake off the weight of the day before retreating back into the solitude of my apartment. The streets outside were damp, the sidewalks wet from an earlier drizzle that had long since ceased, but the air still held a chill, the kind that makes you zip up your jacket and pull the collar a little higher. The city seemed peaceful, almost sleepy, with only a few people around, lonely pedestrians. A couple of delivery trucks parked on the side, the quiet hum of distant cars. I walked, my footsteps steady, almost rhythmic, as I passed the corner store and the same group of tired regulars sitting outside the coffee shop, their faces weathered by time and the city itself. It wasn't until I reached the small square near the park that I saw her. She was standing just outside the old bookstore, leaning against the wall with her back slightly arched, a posture that seemed both relaxed and deliberate. She was dressed simply, wearing a long, dark coat that reached her ankles, the fabric a shade of deep brown that almost seemed to melt into the twilight around her. But it was her eyes that caught my attention first, strangely piercing, unnervingly so. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, her gaze soft but steady, as if she was watching something only she could see. But the moment I stepped into her line of sight, I felt it. Her eyes snapped toward me. I froze for just a moment. It was the way she looked at me, not with the usual disinterest or the passing glance that people give one another in a crowded city, but with something deeper, something unsettling. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, almost too intent, as though she were not just seeing me, but studying me, assessing me. There was no warmth in her gaze, no recognition, but still, it felt as if she was waiting for something, like the moment I walked into her vision had been expected, inevitable even. I tried to shake the feeling, thinking it was nothing more than a trick of the light, perhaps an odd coincidence. I glanced away and continued walking, my pace slightly quicker now, trying to shrug off the discomfort that crept up my spine. But as I moved forward, I couldn't shake the sense that she was still watching me, still locked onto me in a way that felt wrong. It was the kind of gaze that makes you check the back of your neck, to make sure no one is standing too close behind you. The kind of gaze that digs into you in a way you can't quite explain. I walked a little faster, but I could feel the eyes on me even from a distance, as though they were trailing behind me, following each step I took. I reached the edge of the park and paused, standing by the old fountain for a moment, just trying to collect myself. The cool air bit at my skin, and the rustle of leaves from the trees above made a comforting sound, a reminder that the world was still turning, that everything was normal. But in the back of my mind, her eyes were there, haunting me with their quiet intensity. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. She was just another person on the street, another face in the crowd. There was nothing unusual about her. And yet, when I turned to look back, I saw her again standing exactly where she had been, still leaning against the wall of the bookstore, still watching me. The strange part was, she wasn't moving. She hadn't shifted at all. It was as if time had frozen around her, leaving her suspended in the same spot, staring directly at me without a single blink. A shiver ran through me. I quickly turned away and walked deeper into the park, my footsteps faster now, my heart thumping a little harder in my chest. But the feeling didn't fade. It only grew. It was as if the very air around me had thickened, and every rustling leaf, every distant sound, felt amplified, as though the world had become unnervingly silent. My breath came quicker, my steps growing more erratic as I tried to outrun the feeling of being watched. I kept my gaze fixed ahead, not daring to look back again, but the sense of her presence clung to me, like a shadow that refused to leave. By the time I reached the park's exit, I had all but convinced myself that it was nothing, that it was just a trick of the mind, that the feeling of being followed was an echo of something far less sinister. And yet, as I neared the street corner, I couldn't help myself. I glanced over my shoulder just once. She was there again, standing at the corner of the street, just inside the park entrance, but this time, she wasn't alone. Her eyes were still fixed on me, but now there were other figures around her, blurry, indistinct shapes, standing just out of focus, their outlines shuddering like heat rising off pavement. They seemed to emerge from the shadows, as if they had always been there, waiting. Their forms twisted and warped in a way that made it impossible to tell if they were even real or just mirages. And yet, her eyes, those unsettling, wide eyes, remained fixed on me, unmoving. A chill ran down my spine, and my heart leaped into my throat. I turned and started walking briskly, my legs moving faster than they ever had, pushing through the crowd of pedestrians now filling the street. But the whole time, I could feel her eyes on me. The weight of her gaze didn't leave, didn't fade, like an anchor tying me to the spot. I crossed the street quickly, weaving between people, desperate to lose the sensation that I was being pulled toward her, as if my body was moving against my will. The crowd thickened around me, more people spilling into the street as the evening rush took over. And for a moment, I thought I was safe. But then, from somewhere within the swarm of faces, I saw her again. Not in the distance, not at the edge of the crowd, but right there, in front of me, her eyes still locked onto mine. She had closed the distance in a way that made my stomach drop, as if she had been waiting for me to find her. Her face was now less distant, and she smiled at me, a small, unsettling curve of her lips that seemed to promise something I didn't understand. The crowd moved around us, unaware, passing by like I was invisible. And yet, I couldn't look away. Her eyes held me in place. I don't remember how I got home that night. I don't remember the steps I took to reach my apartment, or when I closed the door behind me. But I do remember her eyes. I remember the way they never left me, how they remained with me long after the streets had gone quiet and the city had returned to its usual rhythm. They stayed with me, relentless and unblinking, as if they were a part of me now, something I could never forget, never escape. And as the days went on, I couldn't help but wonder, had I truly left that street, or had I been following her the whole time, without even realizing it? Had the crowd ever really been real, or had I simply been moving through it, a part of a city that had already changed around me, that had already become something else? I don't know. But I do know one thing for sure. I can still feel her eyes on me, even now. I don't know when it started happening. Or maybe I should say, I don't know when I first noticed it. The city around me had always felt familiar, even when it wasn't. The same corners, the same shops, the same faces passing by on their own errands. It was the sort of place where, if you lost your way, you could still find your bearings by the smell of bread baking or the hum of the corner coffee shop's door. That's how I thought of it ordinary, comfortably ordinary, a place that just existed. But on that one particular morning, it wasn't the same. I woke up, as usual, in the cramped little apartment above the bookstore where I worked. The air felt damp, as it often does on mornings that seem like they could rain but never quite do. I pulled on my coat, the same worn, navy blue one I'd had for years, and tied my shoes in a way that was second nature. No sense of foreboding. Just the regularness of life that keeps you moving. I stepped outside into the mist that clung to everything, making the buildings look blurry and distant, like they were suspended in a fog I couldn't touch. The streets were wet, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I took my first steps in the direction I always walked, past the old bakery with its cracked window and the cafe that always had too many chairs out for the few customers it seemed to get. I didn't notice any difference as I walked along the familiar stretch of road. I passed the same people, Mr. Patterson with his umbrella, the jogger who never seemed to be in a rush, and nodded at the same landmarks I'd passed for years. But then I turned the corner. It's strange how little things can change without your noticing, and how suddenly you realize something's different. When I rounded the bend, I found myself in a street I didn't recognize. The buildings were taller, their architecture sharper and colder, with long, sleek glass windows that reflected the cloudy sky in a way that made everything look surreal. The street was wider, and the cars parked along the curb were sleek and foreign, their headlights gleaming with a brightness that felt out of place in the overcast light. I stopped for a moment, taking in the unfamiliar scene. I had never been here before, I was sure of that. And yet, there was something familiar about it, too. A sensation that brushed against my senses like a memory I could hear the low hum of distant voices, but no one was walking by. The air was too still. I looked behind me. The street I'd just walked down was gone. The old bookstore, the small shops, the crooked lampposts, they were all absent. All that remained was this strange, polished version of the city I thought I knew. A clean, clinical version, as if someone had decided to remake the world in a way that was almost too perfect. Almost like it was a place in a movie set, but with none of the reassuring edges of the places I knew. It felt unreal. A painted backdrop that had somehow replaced the real thing. I stood there, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was the fog, the kind of fog that distorts everything around you, even your own sense of time and place. But the more I looked, the more the world around me seemed out of sync. The shapes of the buildings were wrong. Their colors weren't quite right. The people, or at least the ones who walked past, felt like they were moving too fast, or not fast enough. Like they were stuck in a different rhythm than I was. I turned back the way I came, thinking that maybe if I retraced my steps, everything would return to normal. But the street behind me wasn't there anymore. It had shifted. The curve of the sidewalk, the familiar puddle by the corner, the old bicycle rack I used to pass every day, they were all gone. In their place was a clean stretch of road with no landmarks I recognized. Just the same sleek, unfamiliar buildings stretching into the distance. I began to walk again, this time without really knowing why. I had no destination in mind, but something about the way the city had changed made me feel like I had to keep moving, keep searching for something, for anything that would make sense of what had happened. As I walked further down this strange new street, I could see glimpses of what seemed like a different world. Neon signs blinked in foreign languages I couldn't read. People passed by, their clothes sharp and modern, but their faces were unfamiliar, like they didn't belong to the world I had known. A heavy sense of loneliness settled over me, a quiet realization that I was completely alone in this place, in this version of the city that wasn't mine. I didn't know where I was going anymore. The buildings loomed overhead, but they weren't just buildings. They felt like walls closing in around me, like I was being guided down a path I couldn't control. A path that led away from everything I knew. I reached an intersection where 3 streets met, and for the first time, I paused. There was no signpost, no map. Just the streetlights casting a dim glow over everything, like they were waiting for me to make a decision. I could turn left, I could turn right, or I could keep walking straight ahead. But no matter which way I chose, the city would still feel foreign, like it was being played on a loop that didn't belong to me. It was a city I couldn't quite place. And yet, it felt like the city I'd always known, twisted just enough to make it unsettling. I walked down one of the streets, hoping that the further I went, the closer I'd come to something that felt like home. But the further I went, the stranger it all became. The buildings stretched even higher, their glass and steel walls gleaming in a way that felt unnatural. The sidewalks became more polished, the cars more expensive. The people I passed now moved with a hurried, almost mechanical precision, as though they were programmed to be in a hurry. Yet none of them seemed to notice me. They didn't look at me, didn't speak to me, as if I were invisible. It felt like the city was something I had been dropped into, an echo of the place I'd always known, but not quite the same. At some point, I stopped and looked around. The city stretched out before me, vast and unyielding, an endless expanse of streets and buildings I didn't recognize. I realized then that the city I had walked down had changed. Or maybe it was never the same city at all. I had entered a version of it that was different from the one I had known. A version where everything was slightly off, where nothing made sense but everything felt strangely familiar. I don't know how I ended up here. I don't know how I walked down the same street and ended up in a different city. But as I stand here now, amidst this strange, bright new world, I can't help but wonder if the city I used to know ever truly existed. Maybe it was always like this, hiding behind a veil, just waiting for me to see it. Or maybe, in some twisted way, I've always been here, walking down the same street, in a city that never quite was. And as I look around, I realize that I can't escape. No matter which direction I go, no matter how many corners I turn, I'll always be in this place. A place that isn't mine. A place that's always been just out of reach, hidden just behind the surface of reality, waiting for me to finally notice.